and welcome everybody to Once Upon a Time in London. My name is Harry Nidja. I'm the host. I've got Jan with me, who's co-hosting. Hi, Jan. How you doing? You okay?
I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah. Good New Year.
Jan. Yeah, I mean, if you can hear me, I'm Jan Kodabash from Universal Technology Solutions. Welcome back, 2023, Harry.
Yeah, it's a big year. It's lots of content to make. I'm really excited that we've obviously got this first show this year, and it's around security, which is hot topic. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guests. We have David, Beckett, and Mikko with us from Mira Security. David, could you just do a quick intro to the audience for us?
Yeah, so I would be from a technical kind of background of Mira Security. Currently product manager for a host of products involving encryption, decryption. And yeah, I'm based in just north of Ireland. So yeah, that's myself.
Amazing. Mikko, how about you?
Yeah, I'm Mikko Kiukkanen. I'm from Finland, but I live in London. I've been here for 20-some years. I'm a dual citizen. But I think I'm going to be mainly quiet on this call because David is much more astute to the technical side of encryption and decryption.
Okay, so thanks for that, Mikko. So Harry, we all met. I met David and Mikko a while back, and we got into this conversation about decryption and where it's used. And we ended up talking for quite some time, and I thought, you know what, it'd be good to get it on the show. So, you know, give it to a wider audience. So that's where we are.
No, definitely. I think if anyone's just joined for the first time, you know, me and Jan created this show because we wanted to bring as much value in terms of what we're seeing in the marketplace to you guys and trying to make it more high level, more understandable, and also field questions. So, you know, throughout this show, if you have any questions for any of us, just fire it away. I always look at it from a branding, marketing, consumer point of view. I know Jan looks at it from a principles of technology point of view and, you know, business outcomes point of view. So I think those are quite powerful. Before we get into the conversation, I normally cover some kind of latest tech. So I just wanted to ask, have you guys seen ChatGPT and have you used it? That's the first question I had for you. How about you, Jan?
Yes. Having kids of my own, I bet everyone who's got kids has had a similar experience. I think all of them are rushing to get their essays done or any work done. They see this as the best thing since sliced bread.
It's interesting, right? Because I wrote a blog yesterday on it for a website, and I asked it to write a certain blog on a certain topic. Then I asked it to give me the keywords for the meta tagging for SEO. Then I asked it to turn it into a LinkedIn blog. So it was doing all of that in one session.
It wasn't for this one, was it, Harry?
Not for this, thankfully. Not for this one. But
I'm actually made from ChatGPT. I'm Harry's project yesterday. Create a video.
What's interesting for me is what's stopping, you know, now an IT director of a company going on ChatGPT and saying, give me that knowledge. What's the best security solution around network and encryption? And then the source is coming, all the source data points are coming from the internet, right? So how much can you trust that knowledge and experience versus what we're going to talk about today on this show? That's what fascinates me. How big is that gap between what the internet can provide as an answer and what you guys can provide? And that's fascinating. So I've shut them all up now. See, they can't even speak. They don't even know what to say. Anyway, let's crack into this conversation. Let's kick it off.
Harry, I used it about 2 months ago, the ChatGPT, and I gave it to my 26-year-old son. Yeah. And I said, what do you think? And he said, it's amazing. And, you know, he did computer science in Loughborough University. So it's one of those things. I think, you know, we only at the beginning of the change. You know, agree. How artificial intelligence is going to change the world.
I agree. I think everyone, obviously, when you get new technology, everyone gets scared. But if we look at it from a content perspective, content creation, coding, it just means if this tool is going to make things faster, it means we can then deploy our energy somewhere else. And we need to think about how we do our work and how we can create efficiencies, not be afraid of the tools. which I think is what's happening at the moment. So,
but the other side is kind of hackers doing the same thing. I've seen cases of people writing phishing emails, write an email saying you've won £1,000 and click this link. And I've seen other people asking, give me PowerShell command to do a reverse listener to send data out. So then you can start writing viruses using ChatGPT. So it's scary from both ends. So it's scary, but it can be very good.
Exactly. 100%. I agree. Okay, well, let's crack into this. Who wants to do the high level intro then for, in terms of, we're talking about security, we're talking about encryption.
David, are you good with that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I might share 1 or 2 slides if you give me share access. Yeah, but essentially, I don't want to be going too much into slide decks and want to keep it as interactive as possible. So if anyone has any questions at any stage, shout them out. But yeah, so I mean, decryption, let me screen share this, but so I mean, as everybody knows, internet traffic essentially is always encrypted nowadays. If traffic isn't encrypted going out to the internet, you kind of question the website. You see a website not using HTTPS, you start questioning, should I be using it, even if it's got no personal data on it? So encryption's great, and we're very pro encryption. But the downside of encryption is, and this is what we were just talking about with ChatGPT, is there's positives and negatives of any good technology. And that's kind of also true for TLS. It's great. I use it. I want the best standards. And that's a core thing which we'll talk about as we go along, is we believe in using the best ciphers and the best TLS encryption. But the downside is hackers can then use it to hide what they're doing. Firstly, they could download viruses into your company, and you may have the best firewall, IDS, IPS, whatever it is, but unless those security solutions are decrypting, they can't see anything. And then it's also true for data exfiltration. They can be sending data out, outbound, all your PDFs, all your confidential data. And again, you need to have visibility into that. And you can try and use antivirus to try and cover a lot of your bases, but there's always going to be devices on your network which you can never put an antivirus fully on, or you may miss. So maybe some Linux servers, you may not have the full antivirus suite from your vendor for Linux. Printers, you've got everything, IoT. And if they use TLS, then how do you look inside? So essentially what we do as a company is we give decryption solutions to customers to then decrypt that traffic and see within the TLS session. And we've been doing this since 2010 as part of Netronome. We were one of the first companies to ever do TLS decryption back in 2010. That part of the business went off and got acquired by Bluecoat, and we still owned all of the intellectual property and code, but we kind of sold and kind of managed, we kind of gave that part of the business to Bluecoat back in 2013. But now we're kind of coming back into this space, and we've always been developing this decryption technology since then. And we're leaders in the space. But in terms of what we do, and Mikko, if you ever want to jump in, feel free. But to kind of give a bit of one slide, this is the main slide I'm going to show, and then we're going to discuss. But essentially what we do is we sit in the middle using our product line, which is called an ETO, which stands for Encrypted Traffic Orchestrator. So we look at all traffic coming through our appliance, and we call it a bump in the wire. So you do not have to send your traffic to us using proxies, by re-architecturing your IP address space or anything of that space. You just plug us in the middle of your physical network, and essentially we detect every single bit of TLS traffic on your network, and we can then either decrypt or not decrypt. based on what you want as an enterprise. So you can do that based on the category of the website. You know, you may want to decrypt emails, but don't decrypt anything financial or healthcare related. We have a full policy engine that allows you to configure that. But essentially, for NIST to work, we do not break encryption. There's no way of breaking the latest levels of encryption, TLS 1.3. And that's quite well known. You cannot break it. Instead, what we do is we become a man in the middle, essentially. So in order for us to do this decryption, either the clients have to trust us, or else the server we have control of. Well, not fully in control of, but essentially it's down to TLS certificates. So if you own the web server, let's say I'm going to google.com and Google wants to decrypt, they can put their key and certificate of their website into our appliance. We have to terminate the connection within our appliance, and then we create another TLS connection at the bottom. So at the top, you would have google.com, we would terminate, and then we would create another TLS session with new keys and when we use that certificate to then allow us to then get access to the plain text, because we would decrypt and re-encrypt on both sides of that TLS flow. In terms of most enterprises using employee laptops, it would work the other way, where we do not have google.com's certificate and key. So what we do is we use your enterprise certificate authority, which most enterprises have, but if not, you can create one on our box, and we will talk to google.com and have a TLS session. So we're like the client in that case, talking to google.com. We would then talk to them using one set of keys and over that TLS connection. And then we would create another TLS connection down to the laptop using that enterprise certificate authority, creating the certificate and key for google.com. But in order for this to work, that laptop has to trust that certificate authority, which is the case in most enterprises. You have private certificate authorities, but we do not break encryption. We do not, encryption is fully, we're using the highest standard of encryption on both sides of our appliance, but what we're using is known certificates or internal certificate authorities in order for us to terminate the connection, create another one. So we still work with TLS 1.3, the latest elliptic curve. But we have to be in line in order to allow us to happen. But the main benefit we give is, well, we give a couple of main benefits, but the main one would be that we can decrypt once and feed to multiple tools. So as I said before, most traffic is encrypted, but you have to decrypt to get visibility. But if you enable decryption on your next generation firewalls, on your IDS, on your IPS, on 3 or 4 different security tools, which the market's going to is you have multiple tools. We can decrypt it once and feed all of your tools over the network. So essentially what we do is we strip out the TLS and send it on as packets. So we work with any tool, but we can decrypt once and feed all of these tools, and so they don't have to decrypt, because a lot of the time, as soon as you turn on decryption within these firewalls, your performance can dramatically decrease. I mean, I want to say half, you get half the performance, but actually it's probably much more. And essentially you're paying a lot of money for these security tools, and you're getting a lot lower performance, and essentially there's a cost involved there. So we work both on the physical space and also in the VM space. So we have physical appliances, and that can go up to 50 gigabits per second. But we also have 10 gigabit models, and I think 25 gig. And then as well as that, we have KVM and VMware ESXi VMs that can do 5 gigabits per second, but we are working on improving this. And we're currently working on the cloud as well for AWS to get in that space. So yeah, I mean, hopefully that's like an overview of what we do. Our main goal is to decrypt. We're not a security tool company. what we are is a product that sits in front of your security stack, and we help that security stack to get visibility. And we do this, I believe, well, the best in the business for this, because we actually have the one goal of doing decryption. We're not just an add-on, and a lot of the time those security tools do not do decryption properly, and they actually lower your security of the TLS connections. So actually they're actually weaken your security profile.
So David, that point there, you made a couple of good points there. One of the main ones that I see is a lot of customers will opt for having one of their aggregation units, whether it's a firewall load balancer, do that job. Yeah, and it's the two type of directions that they take. Some actually see it so much more beneficial, or even there's also a cost optimization by getting something to do it outside of that, because on some of those aggregation units, you're having to buy licensing, I guess, and you're having to buy something that's got a lot more performance. I'm guessing you can that's one, by using a product like yourselves, you're offloading a lot of that from some of those other boxes just to do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. So I mean, there's two different ways. I mean, actually, there's one thing I may bring up just before. So on our website, then we also have this here, which is about different architecture for TLS solutions. It's not talking about specific vendors, but it's just, I bring it up now just in case anyone wants to have a look on Mira Security website. But there's a couple of different ways of doing it. So yeah, I mean, you talk about the load balancer type approach. Yeah, so firstly, from the load balancer approach, how do you get that traffic to the load balancer? And a lot of the time it's through changing the destination of the IP routing to get to it. So firstly, if you have an existing network, you have to reorchestrate your entire network layout to do this. Secondly, what they do is they decrypt, and some of these vendors will create like a plain text decrypted zone in your network, but it can be quite hard to actually set this up from a network perspective. Talking to customers who currently use those tools, a lot of them say, actually, we've tried it and we've given up on it after a few weeks. And instead we go for a bump in the wire type security appliance like this, and they can get it running in a couple of hours. The other way of doing it is, as you say, through a next generation firewall type of device. And a lot of them do have decryption, but as I said before, firstly, these tools are quite expensive. You could be spending £50,000 on a firewall, and you're spending 2/3 of the money on just decryption. So it's very expensive. Secondly, decryption for a lot of these tools is an add-on. It's a tick box for a data sheet. You look for a firewall, you look at the data sheet, TLS decryption, tick box, but they don't actually, it's not a main goal of the product, it's a tick box. So firstly, in terms of policy control, from a perspective, a lot of companies want to actually have fine control over what they decrypt, what they don't. A lot of these tools do not have very flexible policies to configure that.
So, sorry, I was just going to say on that part. So it is, if I'm looking at considering a tool that's outside of my standard infrastructure, what I'd want to know is, okay, well, let me see what should I be looking for. I could look at the performance, because a lot of those devices give you some type of performance statistics. But even when I'm installing your product, what I'd want to do is I want to be in a position to test it and actually do a bake-off between the two. Have you been in that situation? I've got some examples of what I would do, but what would you advise would be the best way to actually, if I had that ability to do a bake-off myself, because I'm looking at introducing it, how would I test these two, or what would I need? So
firstly, I suppose, in terms of, before we get to actually the traffic, one of the main benefits of our virtual machine as well is we do have virtual machines. So if you wanted to do a, test them out and compare, we have a virtual machine model, so you don't have to be getting a hardware or anything into your network to test. But what
you're nice guys, you're gonna give me a loan device, a physical.
Oh, am I? Okay, I'll give you a loan device. But so what I would do, all right, so even a basic test, right? If you enable decryption on us, well, actually, firstly, what I would do is a website called SSL Labs. And what they do is when you go to it, they would give you a security kind of assessment. You can either assess your website, so you could type in your company website and it would give you a result page saying how good your encryption is of your TLS certs, but you can also do it for your browser connecting to it. So if you open up Chrome, go into it, it will tell you how good your browser is. Now, what I would then do is I would take those other vendors the firewall vendors, enable decryption, put that same browser through that same firewall and see what the level of security is for your encryption.
Right.
And I would, I can't name names, but there's some very puzzling output you can get from some of the leading firewall vendors. They don't actually use TLS 1.3. So TLS 1.3 is what everyone should be using. You turn on decryption on their firewall, all of a sudden you start using TLS 1.2. But if your average security architect knows reasonable amount of information about TLS, but they don't know everything. It's quite a complex topic. So for them, they think, oh, this is working, but actually use a basic resource like that website I'm talking about, and you'll see they actually downgrade your security. They change the ciphers, so they use weaker ciphers. So you're not as secure. You're not using TLS 1.3, and most people do not realize this because they just see it as a tick box. But there is a major security degradation you get from these vendors.
So what about looking at, because one of the main advantages also is performance. Now, if I'm looking at testing this tool through performance, because now that's one of the benefits, I'm not going to have to buy licensing on these other devices. I've got this Mira device. Using some type of tool like an ICSI or a packet generator to actually do this transaction maybe once through your firewall to see how it performs, and then are those kind of tests you see people doing to kind of get statistics on how well it's performing, or how well it's saved, how much it's saved, if you like.
So I mean, we have so I mean, the thing with ICSI is it's quite expensive, but we do know of but there is it's usually vendor kind of level is the people who have the ICSIs. Your average enterprise usually can't justify that money, but we have had those type of traffic generation tools running against our product. But what you can do as well is there is still some open source and some ways of doing traffic generation. It may not be as customizable, but but there's a couple of different ways of also how do you profile decryption. So firstly, you've got connections per second, like how many websites can you open per second, or TLS handshakes. And then there's different types of computation. So historically, used to be RSA, which is more computation for handshakes, and then it's moved up the elliptic curve, which is a bit easier. But sometimes when you connect with it into your website using HTTPS, it can keep like a session token, like a cookie. So next time you connect, it's a lot more efficient. So you can reuse your connection from last time, essentially. So some of these data sheets from these vendors, they actually talk about how many websites you can open or how many sessions you can create, but it can actually just be reusing where you've already done all the computation on the firewall. But you would profile bandwidth, but quite often bandwidth isn't the bottleneck. It's actually your connections per second. How many new flows can you create? And in terms of our performance, we would actually way outperform any of these firewall vendors in terms of connections per second, because it's all my name.
So one of the other questions I've got is where these devices, where this function is being carried out currently, even firewalls in some places is owned and or taken care of from the networks team. The actual InfoSec team is where they're looking at the the exposures and all the analytics sometimes, because it's kind of separate teams in an organization. When you're using network devices to do that offloading, if you like, and inspection, yeah, and then sending it off to these devices, you're actually got, I suppose it's not conflict of interest, but using a separate device to actually offload that is kind of, you're diversifying that completely, aren't you? You're not actually keeping any of that information that is exposed. Basically, what I'm trying to get is, once you decrypt on a network device, the network device is exposed to that, yeah. And so now you've got that exposure of that information to pass it on a device that's not usually administered by the InfoSec team, if you like. I don't know if I made myself clear, but with a device that offloads it and just sends it off, it can be owned and just sent to a completely separate team than say that's looking after, say, a firewall or a aggregation device.
Yeah, so I mean, as part of our, I suppose something to touch on as well is as part of our actual product. I mean, we do decryption, but we also do a lot of logging. So we actually do full logging of all of the TLS flows, all of the handshakes, what type of certificates. So we also can be used ourselves for analytics instead of, relying, but you will probably end up, if you have existing network and analytics tools, you'd still want to, and they would give information that we don't, so it'd be more combining us with them.
Right.
But yeah, but essentially from like a certificate of, you keep all your keys and certificates on us. So rather than having a copy of your certificate authority keys on every one of your firewalls and all of your network monitoring tools in order to allow them to decrypt, you can just trust us with one central place to store all of your news keys. And we also work with HSMs, which are like secure certificate kind of storage from from third parties like Thales. So we can also use third party HSMs to keep those keys and certificates secure. But yeah, keeping it all within one place for NAT decryption is a more secure model.
And there is also a security posture that enforces organizations. There's certain criteria that they can't encrypt certain types of traffic as well. And is your product open to actually determine that type of information and actually not decrypt?
Yeah, so I mean, there is like ethic questions, and as you say, from even human resources perspective, you can only decrypt with our product. Let's say employee laptops, you will not be decrypting their personal phone because their personal phone will detect decryption. The cert is different. But in terms of employee laptops, it's made for employee use. You've got your company antivirus security policies on it. But occasionally an employee may access their private or using your workplace healthcare scheme and typing in personal healthcare information. And as a company, you do not want to be decrypting that. So within our policies engine, you can define certain websites you don't want to decrypt, but obviously that's not usable because there's thousands of healthcare websites. So what we also have is a categorization database. So we've got, I think it's 35 million websites, and we have a category for each of those websites. So you can create a rule to say if it's finance, if it's healthcare, if it's whatever, then do not decrypt, allowing that traffic to come through without being decrypted. So you can say to your employees, we're not going to be looking at your personal healthcare information. And that also keeps human resources happy, and that gives kind of answers the question around ethics. A lot of companies have, and a lot of the time, it's a company laptop. You've got your antivirus on there monitoring which files are opening. So it's no different from that perspective. We're just looking at it from a traffic perspective, whereas the antivirus looks at it from a user space, memory space, host space perspective. But you can do the policies to give that privacy to the sensitive types of web traffic they will be using.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing I think of having a device that's not a particular appliance for it, and when I say that, it's not as actual firewall that's doing that, is that if you've got, say, for example, remote branches that are sitting, wherever they are geographically, but you still want that visibility. And the only product you've got in your product catalog is a firewall that does that. You've got to then go and apply a firewall in all these locations. I'm guessing with your device, if that's the function, because you still want to have that visibility at, say, a branch level, all you have to do is install the kind of software version maybe that you've got there. So you don't have to go and deploy firewalls everywhere, just to maintain that function. Just you see what I'm saying on that?
Yeah. So I mean, that's quite often is one of the rollouts is maybe in the main headquarters, they have a physical appliance, maybe satellite offices with 10, 20, 30 employees, they can put a VM. And as well as that, we also have a very flexible licensing model. So, instead of you having to buy a certain capacity, or instead you license it and you can upgrade the license throughout the year if you need to, or throughout your purchase. So you can buy a 10 gig appliance, but you only have a 1 gig internet link, buy a 1 gig license and save yourself money. 2 years later, you upgrade the license.
I don't think a lot of people are doing that type of analysis to actually see what type of cost saving that is. That's an important one to do. I'd like to just move on to say the cloud, and I know we kind of touched on it a little bit, but where a lot of people are moving to like a cloud solution for their security aggregation points, with people working from home or whatever, you've got a VM or virtual appliance product. So how do you see yourself fitting in that space as well?
So it's actually something we're literally started in the last few weeks. So we're aiming to get into the cloud in our next software release, which will be happening later in this year. But in terms of, we have VM. So technically we can just put that in the cloud, but the only kind of differences is your routing. So on a private network, physical box, you have physical fiber optic links you can tap into. On a VM, you've got VMware interfaces. On a cloud, it operates a couple layers up on the IP space. It's got no concept of a physical link or switches. So for AWS, it's got a gateway load balancer, which was released, I think, 1.5 years ago. And essentially, the gateway load balancer was pretty much the main goal of that is firewalls, inline devices such as ourselves, and that uses like tunneling using Geneve. So that is something we need to add to our product in order to make that transition from a private cloud VMware to the public. But so essentially, it's your routing is the thing, but it does it through tunneling. So we're going to be adding that to our existing product line. And then that will allow us to move into the cloud and allow you to send traffic going from all your servers. You route them using route tables in AWS to our appliance, and then we can then send it off to any security tool, again, using tunnels is how it would work.
So one thing that I see there, and the question that I had was, where you're using your security aggregation as a SaaS service, maybe, although you're a tenant of that, it's still a third party, for example. Is that a compliance requirement? So for example, if that's doing the decryption, whereas previously you've got your firewall, say locally at your data center or on your branch, you own it, you operate it, it's in your data center. Now that you've moved that to the cloud, does that change the security posture of some places, requiring something that does that decryption for them that they can own in the cloud? So because they're not comfortable, or they've got a security compliance requirement that says a third-party service can't do our decryption. Yeah.
I mean, it's not something I've discussed with many customers in detail, so I don't have any real life examples. But the cloud gives a lot more flexibility, I think, to customers, and they can easily try out different vendors or marketplace. There's hundreds of security vendors out there, and I see also a merge to people using multiple tools when they get to the cloud, because when you had hardware, you don't want to, it's expensive, but as soon as you go into VM, EC2, then all of a sudden it's very easy to be like, why do we not have a secure Suricata So I see also a lot of open source like Zeek, Suricata, which corporate customers may not have used in the past, but now because they can easily spin up these things.
That's the point. That's one point I'm trying to make, is that maybe people are seeing it as an easy deployment model. Are they asking that question as to, well, actually it is easy, but we've changed the ownership domain now from us. It is a third party, although we do control it, we operate it. But I'm just wondering if people are asking those type of questions, because it does change things, and so, you know, having the capability to do it outside of that, because now we're giving that visibility to them. But it's an interesting one for me. Just I'd like to see what, and if anyone's listening, what your views on that part from a cloud perspective. I guess it's coming up to half an hour now, isn't it? Harry, have we overrun again?
We're overrunning. I think you guys obviously have been deep in conversation. It's an interesting thing. I've obviously been listening from trying to work it out from a high level point of view. It feels to me that this service that you have is, I mean, how many companies have even thought of having this service? Like, I can imagine a lot of companies have firewalls, have security in the vendor's products. Having a middleman between the two, it sounds great, and obviously what you've described is great, but how many companies actually do you think are doing this right now?
As in competitors of us, or companies
deploying? Well, just the ecosystem yourself, like, is it a proportion, small proportion?
So, I mean, it kind of goes back to, I mean, you know, so Blue Coat, everyone would know, and that's who we sold the business back to, but they're no longer selling, they don't do virtual machines, they don't do smaller product lines, they're aiming for very data centers. So, so there is a massive, a lot of companies have been using middlemen like this for, or middle boxes, sorry, for the last 10 years, but they now want to go virtual. So yeah, there's a lot of customers out there looking for solutions, and we're sitting here with the best in the business in terms of performance and virtual machine middle boxes, and they can't buy anything anymore from some other companies. So
yeah, and I think, Harry, that question goes back to how deep they look into this. It is sometimes a case of people are not, or some organizations may not be as mature in their, say, security development, and so they've not really looked into it as much yet. And so a vendor just telling them, look, we do this for you, it's fine for them. However, some look at it a lot more deeper, and that's what I touch on the testing as well. They want to see all those benefits they're getting, and so then they would reach out to, you know, people like Mira and say, actually, let's have a look at how well you guys do this, because there's also a cost benefit as well as, you know, a security benefit to it.
No, definitely.
And then they also own it. I mean, a lot of companies want to own everything. They want to have, you know, they don't want to be tied to one vendor, because vendors can get bought out by a bigger company, and next thing the product doesn't exist anymore. So we've seen that quite often, actually, is where people want to have big control of every block themselves, rather than having everything built in.
Yeah, that's really important part, actually. You mentioned there, David, having something that does this, that's outside of, say, a general traffic path, is quite key as well. You know, that's an important part. Amazing. But okay, definitely, it's another one. I think we need to move this 30-minute cap, maybe longer. But look, David, I think Mikko's just hasn't got his video on, but I think that was really interesting for me, and I think it's going to be maybe we'll be talking about it definitely with some of the things we're going to be working on, David. But but for this week, I think we're good, Harry.
I think thanks so much, everybody, for all the content. It's definitely been enlightening for me to see this new area of security. It's something I haven't seen before, and hopefully everybody on the call or everybody watching has enjoyed the content. And obviously next week, me and Jan are going to be looking for future guests and future content to do. Well, obviously, I can imagine Mira coming back at some point in the future as well with an update on potentially looking more at the cloud side.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.
That'd be pretty
Thanks
cool.
for the invite. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot, David. Thanks, Mikko.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks, Harry. And thank you, David. I was able to keep quiet.
You got lucky this time. Right. Next time you won't be so lucky. Don't worry.
Thank you.
Oh, David can tell you I can talk, but yeah.
All good. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend, everybody. And yeah, we'll see you soon.
You too.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Sorry, Harry. Now they're going to have this off because they won't think of it. Everyone else, I'm a bit annoyed.